Imagine a world where racism never existed, where people were never judged, oppressed, or treated unfairly because of their skin color, ethnicity, or background. What kind of world would that be? What if, since the beginning of time, humanity had seen each other as equals, focusing on unity rather than division? Today, we're going to explore this thought-provoking scenario and consider where we would be as a global society without the weight of racism holding us back. To understand how this hypothetical world could have shaped history, let's start from the very beginning: early human civilization. From the ancient world through the modern age, racial divisions and discrimination have played a significant role in shaping societies, conflicts, and economies. If racism never existed, imagine how different the interactions between civilizations would have been. In ancient times, powerful empires like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China thrived by trading with others across their borders. Without racism, these early exchanges between different peoples may have been more harmonious. Instead of seeing differences in skin color or ethnic origin as a reason to dominate or subjugate, societies could have formed stronger partnerships, leading to more cultural exchange and collaboration. Science, art, and technology could have advanced at a faster rate, fueled by a spirit of mutual respect and cooperation. Fast forward to the age of exploration and colonization. In our world, European powers used racist ideologies to justify colonization and the subjugation of entire continents, like Africa and the Americas. But in a world without racism, the colonization process would have looked entirely different, if it happened at all. Without racial hierarchies, explorers might have engaged more as equals with indigenous populations, learning from them and sharing knowledge, rather than viewing them as inferior and enslaving them. Speaking of slavery, one of the most profound impacts of racism throughout history has been the transatlantic slave trade, which forcibly brought millions of Africans to the Americas. This devastating period shaped much of the economic power of Western nations at the expense of African communities. If racism didn't exist, there would have been no justification for such inhumanity. Instead, societies could have focused on building cooperative economies, where trade, not exploitation, drove prosperity. Imagine how different the United States might look today without the legacy of slavery and the deep racial divisions that followed. African civilizations would not have been systematically destroyed or destabilized, and Africa's economic and social development could have followed a different, more stable path. The African diaspora, rich in culture, knowledge, and diversity, might have spread around the world on its own terms, contributing to global culture and science without the trauma of enslavement. Now think about the civil rights movements of the 20th century. In our world, the fight for racial equality has been long and painful, marked by resistance, violence, and injustice. But in a world where racism never existed, we wouldn't need these movements. Communities of all races would have grown up side by side, learning from one another, with equal access to resources, opportunities, and representation. Without the barriers imposed by racism, imagine the advancements we could have made. Education, medicine, technology, fields that have historically been dominated by a select few could have flourished with contributions from all corners of the world. How many brilliant minds were silenced, their potential unrealized, because of racial prejudice? In a world without racism, those barriers would never have existed, and the full breadth of human talent could have been unleashed. Consider the global economy. Throughout history, economic systems have often been built on the backs of racial inequality, from slavery and segregation to the exploitation of labor in developing nations. Without racism, these exploitative systems wouldn't have been necessary. Instead, economic growth could have been more evenly distributed across the world, with all people given the opportunity to contribute and thrive. There may have been less economic disparity between nations, with countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America on more equal footing with Europe and North America. Moreover, the absence of racism would have had a profound effect on global conflicts. Many of the wars, uprisings, and acts of violence throughout history have been fueled by racial tension, fear, and hatred. Without these divisions, it's possible that we would have seen fewer conflicts overall. Societies might have focused more on diplomacy, collaboration, and peace-building. The tragic costs of war, including the loss of life, resources, and cultural heritage, could have been avoided or significantly reduced. In the modern world, without racism, movements like Black Lives Matter or anti-discrimination efforts wouldn't be necessary. Instead, we'd see a world where all people, regardless of their background, were treated fairly from the start. This doesn't mean that there wouldn't be challenges. Human beings would still face conflicts and disagreements. But these disputes wouldn't be based on racial prejudice. Instead, differences would be more about culture, ideas, or economics, not the color of someone's skin. Socially, without the deep scars of racism, our collective sense of identity might be more unified. Communities that have been historically marginalized would have thrived and had greater representation in all facets of society, whether it's in politics, business, or the arts. Representation in the media would have been more diverse from the beginning, and stereotypes that perpetuate harmful ideas about different races would never have been created. The stories we tell, the art we make, and the culture we celebrate would reflect a truly global human experience. Politically, there might have been a more equitable distribution of power. Without the structures of white supremacy or racial inequality built into government systems, leadership could have emerged from all racial backgrounds. Countries like the United States, where the effects of racism are still deeply felt, might have a different political landscape today, one that reflects the true diversity of its population. Without racism, the psychological toll on individuals and communities would have been vastly reduced. The generational trauma caused by centuries of discrimination, violence, and inequality would never have taken root. People's sense of self-worth and identity wouldn't be tied to the struggle for recognition or acceptance. Instead, future generations would grow up in a world where their opportunities weren't limited by prejudice and where their potential was celebrated equally. But this brings us to a crucial question. Will racism ever go away? And if it's possible, what would need to happen for it to end? The end of racism requires more than just laws and policies. It would require a profound cultural shift across the globe. Education plays a critical role in this transformation. To truly eliminate racism, we must teach future generations about its harmful effects and how it has held humanity back. We need to celebrate diversity and encourage empathy, creating a culture where differences are seen as strengths rather than threats. Breaking down systemic racism would also require dismantling the social, political, and economic systems that perpetuate inequality. This means addressing disparities in wealth, education, healthcare, and justice. However, the human tendency to categorize and create hierarchies is deeply ingrained in society. While the complete eradication of racism may be difficult to achieve, progress has been made, and the fight for equality continues. We've seen major strides in civil rights, representation, and social justice in recent decades, but there is still much work to be done. Ending racism would require ongoing efforts by individuals, communities, and governments to challenge prejudice, advocate for equality, and create systems that serve everyone equally. It may be a long and difficult journey, but every step toward eliminating racism brings us closer to a world where all people are truly equal. In conclusion, if racism never existed, the world would likely be more advanced, more peaceful, and more equal. There would have been more collaboration, more sharing of knowledge and resources, and less division between peoples. While it's impossible to know exactly what this alternate reality might look like, we can imagine a world where humanity has progressed further, not held back by the artificial barriers of race. It's a world where differences are celebrated, not used as an excuse to oppress. So, What can we learn from this thought experiment? While we can't undo the past, we can strive for a future that more closely resembles the one we've imagined. A world without racism, where every individual is valued for who they are, not the color of their skin. It's a vision worth fighting for, and one that we can all work toward. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more thought-provoking what-if scenarios. Share your thoughts below. How do you think the world would look today if racism never existed? And do you think racism will ever be fully eradicated?